Hello, I'm Jake Kelly. Welcome to my channel. This video is intended as a supplement to my other video, Instruction to Handguns. There I focused on learning to shoot safely and some drills to help build base skills. While I did touch on the differences between revolvers and semi-automatics, I did so only really at a cursory level. Here I will spend some time exploring semi-automatics more deeply for those that would find that of interest. I've also released Introduction Revolvers as a companion piece to this video. Some differences are obvious from the start. A heavy slide on the top of a semi-automatic provides a stable platform so that you can get much better sights mounted to it. In addition, the weight and horizontal cycling action helps counter recoil flip. Differences continue as you load the gun. Revolver is simple. Open the cylinder, feed cartridges into the chambers, roll the cylinder closed, the gun is ready to fire. Semi-automatics are more capable, but more complicated as well. Ammunition must be first loaded into a magazine, not a clip, a magazine. This is a box-like device with a follower to support the cartridges. Also a spring to maintain upward pressure. I'm going to load a 1911 magazine using dummy rounds, of course, no primer, no powder. And the way you do it is you push down the follower that's with the spring underneath it until the back of the cartridge gets underneath these lips and then slide it to the rear. It's very easy with the first round or two. However, the more rounds that are in the magazine, the pressure from the spring underneath pushing up on the follower and the cartridges makes it a little bit more difficult. You have to then press down the back part of the cartridge. Now you can press it a little bit easier and push the next one into place. It still gets harder the more and more rounds you insert. There are some devices that are available that make this job really simple and easy. This is one from a company called Uplula. It's kind of a weird name. It's capital U, small letter P, capital L-U-L-A, Uplula. It has a metal bar on the front end. You drop the device over the top, close it, and that places the metal bar over the top of the existing cartridge. Pull it down, and when you do, that presses down all of the cartridges in the stack further down into the magazine. Then you can take the next cartridge, just drop it in. It slides right in with no problem at all. Release the spring tension, take the device off, and the cartridge has been seated properly. Pretty simple to use. Well worth the few bucks that it costs. So now we have the loaded magazine. Next we need to load the gun. This seems simple, but some care must be taken. The side of the magazine has a cutout. Right there, you can see it. That cutout matches a spring-loaded bar inside the magazine tube in the gun. So what we need to do is line them up. Turn the gun sideways so that you can see things clearly. Insert the magazine into the well and then press it home firmly with your palm. Do not slam it. You do need to press it firmly to overcome the spring-loaded bar inside, but you don't want to slam it as you might actually drive it past that bar. Either too far, not far enough, can lead to feeding issues. It isn't really that big a deal. Just use normal pressure and you'll be fine. But baby it or abuse it and failures will follow. Okay, so the ammunition's in the gun. We're ready to fire, right? Well, with a revolver, yes, but not with a semi-automatic. With a revolver, once the cartridges are inserted into the cylinder and it is closed, the top cartridge is lined up with the barrel and you're ready to go. With a semi-automatic, inserting the mag does not load around into the chamber, which is at the end of the barrel. I have the barrel taken out of my Glock here, and you can see this part of the barrel is where the rifling occurs. This part of the barrel is where the chamber is located. The round actually needs to get inserted into that chamber before the gun will be ready to fire, and we haven't done that yet. At this point, the chamber's empty. Barrel's there, chamber's there, the ammunition is below it in the magazine, ready to be loaded, but the chamber's empty, so the gun will not fire. With no round in the chamber of the semi-auto and the hammer not cocked, as I mentioned before, the gun cannot fire. We need to make ready. The normal procedure for making ready is to push the slide all the way to the rear. That's going to cock the hammer. Next, release the slide to allow it to slam forward. That's going to strip the round off the top of the magazine and load it into that chamber. Are you ready to fire? If not, be very careful. The gun is hot, and traditional semi-automatics are single-action guns. Once they've been made ready, a single action, pressing the trigger, causes the gun to fire. And most of the time, it's just a small amount of pressure to move the trigger a tiny distance to the rear to fire the gun. Notice there's almost no take-up at all on that trigger. And then once you've done that take-up, just a small, tiny amount of additional pressure would fire the gun. However, there is a saving grace in all of this. If you're not ready to fire, most single-action guns come with an external mechanical safety. And when the action is cocked, this safety, located right here, you raise that up and that will lock the action. At that point, the gun cannot fire. It is safe. You can carry it, you can do anything you want with it, as long as that safety lever remains in the upright position. When you're ready to fire, you manually press that down, and then at that point, the gun is ready to fire, and a slight press on the trigger would fire the gun. Does your gun have the mechanical safety? I don't know. What you need to do is you need to read your owner's manual for details on your gun and understand what safeties may or may not be in effect after you've loaded and made ready. Allow me to step back a moment for an editorial comment. Many, perhaps even most, experienced gun enthusiasts will say never carry a semi-automatic with an empty chamber. They'll say it's designed to be carried cocked and locked, and therefore it's safe to do so. Plus, in a self-defense situation, you'd want the gun immediately available and not have to rack it to make it ready. Plus, you can unlock and fire with one hand if need be, but operating the slide one-handed, well, that takes time and practice. I don't really disagree with any of that, but I have personally had a gun go from safety on to safety off just by inserting it into my holster. I consider carrying a gun with an empty chamber a reasonable alternative, depending on circumstances. I suggest that you consider your specific gun's characteristics and your level of gun handling skills and make a reasoned decision as to what you feel is appropriate for you and the ones that you love. Now, okay, back on topic. Some semi-automatics have a decocker. This is different from a safety that I showed you earlier. It's usually located in the same place as the safety, and it's usually a knob or a lever on the side that you can turn, and what that will do is safely lower the hammer. Afterwards, touching the trigger will do nothing, since the hammer will no longer be under spring tension and will not slam forward to fire the round. Guns of this nature, once they've been decocked, require a long trigger pull to fire the first round, as the hammer must be pushed back against its spring and then released to fire, similar to a revolver. This is a safety feature against possible accidental discharges. But note, the gun will be in single action mode for all remaining shots, with only a slight trigger press required, unless you manually decock it once more. Long hard press for shot number 1, followed by a short light press for number 2. This can be disconcerting. It can really take some getting used to. The third type of semi-automatic is striker fired. These have no hammers, but rather have an internal striker. It's similar to a firing pin, but it's pushed back under spring tension like the hammer was pushed back, and then it's released to fire the gun. 1982, Glock introduced their first striker-fired semi-automatic line. With over 20 million sold so far, I suspect that it's the most successful of its kind. Although striker-fired guns are available from just about every major manufacturer. With any of the 3 types listed, a round fired causes the slide to go rapidly back against an internal recoil spring. This rearward motion pulls the spent case from the chamber, ejects it, and then cocks the hammer, or stages the striker, as the case may be. Next, the recoil spring sends the slide forward, stripping a fresh cartridge from the magazine and loading that into the chamber. This is all done automatic. However, the next round does not fire. The trigger must be reset by allowing it to move forward, and then you can press it again to fire. The reload is automatic, but the firing in the next round is not, hence the term semi-automatic. While hammer-fired semi-automatics still abound, striker-fired guns seem to be taking over. Why is that? Well, I suspect because they have a greater capacity, and perhaps they're deemed more safe. Certainly being able to carry with a round in the chamber but not having to deal with an external safety is a plus. But let's look at this a little bit more. Capacity. Old-style semis have a single-stack magazine and normally max out around 10 rounds. Striker-fired versions mainly use double-stack magazines and can get 15 or more rounds in a similar size grip. This one will hold 10. This one from Mechanic will actually hold 18. And yet they're basically similar size as far as the grip would be concerned in the gun. However, the old approach, the single-stacked 1911 style, is really based more on tradition than any mechanical necessity. The double-stack concept isn't really limited to a particular pistol style. In fact, numerous manufacturers now make 2011s. That's basically a 1911 style single-action only gun, but it uses a double-stack magazine. Safety. Striker-fired guns don't have hammers and don't normally come with any external safeties that must be activated and deactivated by the user. However, most have incorporated internal safeties. Glock has named their approach the Safe Action System. It consists of 3 independent mechanical safeties that focus on trigger, firing pin, and drop safety. They all disengage as the trigger moves to the rear, and then they're reset as the trigger is released. The idea is to make the gun safe to carry, but not impede the shooter when they wish to fire. The strength of the system is it provides an automatic level of safety independent of the shooter. You don't have to remember, did I set that mechanical external safety or didn't I? The weakness is it's completely bypassed if the trigger is accidentally moved to the rear, say if it were caught on clothing while the gun was being holstered. It's important to know your gun and play to its strengths while being aware of any of its weaknesses. Next, let's take a look inside to see how all this wonderfulness is achieved. First, 1911 single-action only gun. We have the base slide, barrel, recoil spring, firing pin spring, and lower assembly. What I want to show you here is the distance from where the hammer would be located when the gun is ready to fire and the breech face. Remember, the cartridge is going to end up being loaded, these are all dummy cartridges of course, loaded into the end of the barrel, and that's going to be inserted in this area like this. The hammer's back here. How does the hammer here hit the primer up here to set off the cartridge? Through the firing pin. All right, the firing pin is going to be in a channel, goes in here, that runs all the way from where the hammer is located to the breech face, and it will then protrude through, you can see the hole right there in the breech face, it will protrude through that hole and impact the primer and then set off the cartridge. Okay, now you see that the firing pin is almost the length that it has to travel. There could be a problem where that slips through by accident and maybe makes contact with the primer. Can't allow that to happen. So you'll notice that the firing pin spring is quite a bit longer than the distance that it has to cover in the firing pin. I'm going to insert that onto the firing pin. And now you'll notice that when I put this in place, notice how far the spring sticks out past where the breech face would be. When you insert this into the channel, it compresses against that spring so that it's in place right up against the back edge of the breech face, but it can't protrude past that breech face and strike the primer unless the spring tension is overcome by a very, very strong hit by the hammer. Next up, a Glock. This is actually a double action only gun, as you must always press the trigger to cock the gun and then press the trigger a little bit further to fire. The cycling action as part of load and make ready, or after a round is fired, pre-stages the striker towards the release point. trigger press then completes the action. These are the component parts taken from the Glock, the slide, the barrel, the recoil spring, all similar to the 1911. But notice the difference between the striker and the firing pin from the 1911. The striker is actually bigger, more bulky. Notice the spring, how much more robust the spring is, although it appears to be shorter in length, than the spring on the 1911. The 1911 firing pin is pretty small. The only thing it does is slam forward to fire and to break the primer and fire the gun. Striker has to do a lot more. It is under a lot more pressure. This is a Glock trigger bar. Notice on the end of the trigger bar is a flat spot. What happens is the striker inside the slide moves to the rear when the slide cycles back. This leg right here on the bottom of the striker sticks down. That's another difference from the firing pin. And what happens is when it clears that flat end of the trigger bar snaps up underneath. And now what happens is when the slide goes forward, it catches that leg and prevents the leg from moving forward, which prevents the striker from moving forward, which then compresses that spring and puts it under a tremendous amount of pressure. Then, when the trigger gets all the way to the rear, that trigger bar slips off the leg, releasing the striker so that it can slam forward and fire the gun. Since the striker is pre-staged by the cycling action, the required trigger pressure is less than would be found on a revolver. Travel is longer than a single-action gun, and the required pressure is a bit greater. So the result is kind of a gun midway between revolvers and single-action only semis. Ready to fire, but without either the revolver's heavy trigger or the hair trigger found on most single-action only guns. Striker-fired guns generally follow the Glock approach. However, some do not. Those from Canik are striker-fired, but the striker is fully cocked any time the slide is cycled. Trigger travel is similar to that of a Glock, but the required pressure is less since the action is already fully set. Their system offers a short but definitive press to the wall and then a crisp break to fire. Frankly, I'm a fan. In summary, hammer-fired guns have a hammer, well, duh, that hits a stationary firing pin that's held back from the breech face and the cartridge on the other side by the spring. The force of the blow drives the pin through the breech face where it makes contact with the primer and fires the round. Striker-fired guns operate in reverse. The striker is moved to the rear and compresses a spring. It is held there and then released to slam forward, functioning then similar to the firing pin. Most striker-fired guns have both trigger and internal drop safeties based on trigger travel. Most single-action only guns do not, but do have user-operated external safeties, most of the time, to render the gun safe. All this affects trigger feel, which is important for your being comfortable with and developing skills with your gun. Revolver, simple operation, easy to load, easy to make ready, easy to fire, but has a fairly long trigger pull and heavy pressure required. The Glock, which is the normal striker fired, once you've loaded and made ready, has the long trigger pull, but it has moderate pressure to allow the gun to fire. The Canik striker fired, once you've loaded and make ready, has, again, the longer trigger pull, similar to the Glock, but has a light but definitive pressure to fire the gun. And then we have the 1911. Once that's loaded and make ready, you have very minimal trigger travel and then extremely light pressure to fire the gun. But most of them do have external safeties so that you can lock it and make the gun safe once you have loaded and made ready. Thank you for watching my introduction. I hope you found the information somewhat helpful. Semi-automatics can be great tools, but they are more complicated than a baseline revolver. If they fit your needs or interest, be sure to spend the range time to become comfortable with them. Look for a club near you that offers GPA, Galactic Pistol Alliance, IDPA, or USPA matches. They offer a fun and safety-focused alternative to just blasting away at a range. And as always, shoot safe.